Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is a great encapsulation of the Asian influence in today's entertainment industry. In today's episode, we will discuss 3 of the biggest movies in the past 10 years, and boy, have we got a good collection for you today.
Beings?
Welcome back, guys. And no, your eyes don't deceive you. There are 3 of us in the studio. We are joined by the great Miko. Welcome, Miko. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Fantastic. And Tim, in case you didn't know, Miko suggested the 3 movies that we are going to discuss today.
I figured. I knew what was going on before I came here. I didn't just walk in to hope what was going on. So I'm sure I'll pick it up on the way, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe just for the audience to get to know Miko a little bit, can you tell us a bit about like your your feelings for the Asian movies and the Asian entertainment?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this invitation to join you this morning. I guess I'm just a movie fan. I love movies. Since I was a kid, I've always enjoyed watching movies just to escape. And I think growing up, I loved watching Hollywood blockbusters with my family. But then something sort of what spoke to me was that it sort of was Western movies that I really consumed a lot growing up. And I didn't really see myself on the screen, except if it was a Filipino movie. But I think in the past few years, seeing people from our community, Darren, on screen, it's been really interesting to see that our stories are now being shown. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's funny. And
that's a great intro.
Yeah. And it's not like we don't have any sort of like Asian content. Like we have the Asian content in our own countries, but in terms of like the mainstream entertainment, it's very rare that we see like a leading actor or actresses are from the Asian background. And what about you, Tim? Like, what's your experience with these types of movies in the industry?
Well, I would say it's similar. Like same thing. I like big into movies, and then it's just like it is mostly Western movies, right? I will say when I was a teenager, that's when I started getting into anime. So I guess like that's like off kilter a bit. That isn't like so Western, but that would probably be like I did watch some like international movies, but mainly it's still heard from a Western like, oh, this is probably a great movie, right? But not like it is now, I would say. Like movies like Parasite and stuff that really kicked it off. And even people angry about, I still remember people being angry about that. It's like, this can't win movie of the year. It isn't American. It's like, bro, you know, this is best movie of the year, not best American movie. And the movie they suggested was, I think it was like the war movie, like 1942 or something.
The Christopher Nolan's movie. And then,
No, there was another one, but that wasn't even an American movie. So people are just stupid. But anyway, I do. And they're not like, you know, they're not so cookie cutter, most of the movies, right? They do tell their own stories and they're interesting in their own way, right? Yeah. Which is always great.
Yeah. And I think when you get to the point of the Crazy Rich Asian movie in the 2018, that was like the jumpstart for like, as you said, like the floodgates of these sorts of content. So why don't we start with that movie?
It's a great starting point.
Yeah. Did
you want to lead us off?
Sure. No. So the first movie I want to talk about is Crazy Rich Asians. It's directed by John Chu. So the story, roughly, it's a romantic comedy, but it's centers on her name is Rachel Chu, played by Constance Wu. So she's an American economics professor, and she flies with her boyfriend to Singapore for her boyfriend's best friend's wedding, and she tries to navigate, his family and the culture there, and also sort of she's trying to sort of be accepted by this family. And I think what she realizes in the movie is that she, despite her being ethnically Chinese, she's so different from the family, and it creates all this tension with his family and the Asian culture in Asia. It's a great story, but then the background of it is all this opulence and all this wealth and sort of this luxury porn that sort of creates a really good movie. And I think audiences agree it made a lot of money. It won, accolades for all these actors. All these actors are now sort of big stars in America. And I think it sort of like opened, this Pandora's box, and sort of Hollywood is listening. And I think it's a great startup point. And I think it sort of, because I always thought like romantic comedies are a great like litmus test sort of, because it's sort of it can appeal to many people, especially to women, and they can invite their boyfriends and their husbands or
any partner just to bring it along
to check it out. And I love this movie. I loved this movie.
And a bit of a side note as well. The director John Chu, that he directed Step Up as well.
He did.
Well, there you go.
Step Up 2, Step Up 3D, and most importantly, 2 of the documentaries from Justin Bieber's filmography.
So truly, a true cultured man of the Asian culture. The Step Up movies.
And but he's from like a dancing background, so there are always dancing in his movies. And Crazy Rich Asians is his most financially successful movie. So the movie was made on a budget of $30 million, right? And then...
So it's pretty low, really. Even like the locale and stuff, like so many lavish places, and like that on the boat when they have that like the bachelor party on the big cruise ship. So I'm like, it looked like there was a bit of money in it, right?
And then it went on to make $239 million.
So not too bad.
Only like 700%. But you're right. I think, especially in this days and age when it seems like Hollywood is really struggling to get the people to go into the cinema, especially when they have to compete with a lot of streaming platforms. And I'm pretty sure they are constantly looking for new materials to get the people into the cinema.
I think that's always the hard thing for Hollywood, trying to latch on to the next big thing, right? They're always searching what's going to make them money, right?
Yeah.
We've had the Marvel boom, and that's kind of like simmered a bit. And now, and like even when like Crazy Rich Asians has like come out, that was like in the midst of the big Marvel as well. So it's kind of like another thing that they could try to latch onto to like, oh, here's like another avenue for us to like go through. And then even seeing like Matt mentioned with like Parasite, like it can be like, it's still like a very Hollywood movie, but from a very different perspective, right?
And I think eventually the audience will get to a certain point where they kind of get to a bit sick of the same content over and over again, because during this time, like the superhero movies are everywhere. So I think they were subconsciously looking for a change. And
especially for Western audience as well, these are probably stories we don't really know about. Like unless you've known, like people from these cultures, you wouldn't understand it. Because that's like, I will say from my point of view, like growing up in Australia, I've met a lot of different Asian cultures just because of like the timing. Like with the war in Vietnam, there was a lot of Vietnamese kids growing up when I was younger, and that's how I kind of learnt about it. Not to like maybe the extent I do now, but like just different cultures, and like it wasn't such a not a big deal, but like it's easier for me to take in compared to like, I know some people are very shut off and not willing to like listen or learn about new cultures and stuff. And this is a great way of doing it, right? A easy breezy like romantic comedy.
Yeah, and I think because it's a romantic comedy, there are sort of tropes that you're familiar with. So there's always going to be, makeover montage. There's always going to be, the villain. There's always going to be the strict, mother that you have to impress. So you have these sort of familiar, tropes, but then you sort of try to add that different cultural angle to it, and I think that's what makes this movie sort of successful
and a bit more fresh, right? It's definitely not from that same angle that we're used to.
And I really enjoyed watching sort of these cultural moments that are more familiar in a specific community. So for example, there's this scene in the movie where the family came together and they were making dumplings. And that's sort of like a very traditional, activity that families do together. Maybe if it were a Western movie, maybe they were making a cake or maybe they were you know, playing sports. In this family, they
definitely be sports. I'm trying to think of like the American thing, and I might be throwing the football out the back or something,
or playing basketball,
and then the father would be too rough or something. It's like, oh, come on, toughen up. What are you? Something like that.
Tossing like a baseball to each other or something like that. But in this family, they're just making dumplings. And then also there's one more scene where it's like a standoff between Rachel Chu, Constance Wu's character, and Auntie Eleanor, played by Michelle Yeoh. They were playing mahjong, which is a traditional like game played in the Asian culture. And even though I'm not familiar with with the
rules,
the gameplay of mahjong, I knew that there was something happening. There was like a back and forth happening.
And we can. I don't know. It might be early to delve into it, but the meaning of that game as well, because it sets up that she like deliberately loses to the mother, right? She loses, and it's like a message for her letting go of Nick, her boyfriend, because she's like, I know I'm not good enough. You don't think I'm good enough. That's it. I'm gone. That's it. It's fine. I'm out of this. It's not worth this. And lets her win. But by letting her win, she ultimately wins the game. Like she shows her hand and showing that she actually won by letting her the mother-in-law win, which is like a great message for like that's like the last 10 minutes of the movie as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great that scene was a great symbolism of the whole movie, which again it's a fairly familiar story. It's Cinderella.
It's not that complicated of a story. It's just that cultural diversity that we're not used to, right? It's just from that different angle.
And also what I liked about this movie is even the characters are sort of familiar. There's always going to be that best friend that's sort of crazy and sort of like has like comedic relief. In this movie, it was played by Awkwafina, and her role really was just comic relief. She would like be like the voice of wisdom, but then she would present it in such a comical way. So I think that's sort of good, because usually in these kinds of movies, that's the only character that's represented by like a multicultural person.
I see what you mean.
You know what I mean? Like there should be like the African American best friend or the Latino sidekick. In this movie, they all just happen to be Asians, and she happens to be the best friend.
It's just kind of who she is. It's not meant to be the cliche thing. It does come across a bit cliche, but that's her character, right?
That's an interesting point because the casting process for this movie received a lot of backlash. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this.
I am.
Because this is supposed to be an Asian movie, right? So they went out on a casting call, and a lot of Asian background actors and actresses came to audition, and a lot of them were turned down because they didn't look Chinese enough. And that caused a bit of a backlash. But have you got some of the other angle of the story?
I did hear about that, and I also heard that the male romantic lead, played by Henry Golding, they had a hard time casting this character because they wanted to pin down the right look and the right personality for this guy. So he was the character was supposed to be like a Chinese Malaysian, Chinese Singaporean character, but he went to the UK for boarding school.
I got that through the accent. I was like, oh, he has a British accent, right? I was like,
So they were able to get this character from this actor Henry Golding, but there was some criticism because I think he is half British. And he's like half like Chinese Malaysian, and they were saying, oh, does this character need to be mixed race or multiracial for us to pin down this character? So I think there was that. I've read about that. That was sort of like the main criticism. But I think he nailed the part.
He did, and after this movie, he got into a few other movies as well. And you know that Brenda Song and Jamie Chung also auditioned for the role of Rachel, but then they didn't get the role. And I think one of them went on Twitter and then just vented. But I think after that, she kind of realized that how big this movie got, and I don't want to be associated to the bad light. So she apologized, and now I hope I can work with you into future projects. The issue that I realized about this movie as well is online people are saying like because of this movie is set up in Singapore, there are a lot of different communities in Singapore. And they are saying like those communities are not represented. So this movie is just focusing on the Chinese background characters, but no Malaysians, no Islam, anything like that. Yeah.
That's a really good point. So from what I understand, Singapore, it's a multicultural country. So there are many different ethnic groups present in that country. So you have the Chinese, you have Malays, you have Tamil, which is a subgroup of from people from India. And I think the criticism was this movie is called Crazy Rich Asians, but it should be, some people were saying it should be called Crazy Rich East Asians, because that's sort of where the focus of the story was. But I understand it. I think that's a valid point. But I think that sort of like talks about like the broader conversation about the film industry, where because there are so limited opportunities to tell stories, we're all fighting for what little we have. We're all fighting for scraps. We're all fighting for just
like
one movie, which I think what's good about this movie is it's opened the door for all our stories to be told. So maybe this story will be the first story, and then maybe there will be more stories to tell that will represent everyone. So I think that's what's happening, and I think that's what's really good about this movie. And just jumping back on what you said about those other actresses, that's I think that speaks to how competitive
acting
is, and sort of because they know that these movies, at least how Hollywood was, structured from 10 years ago, actresses of Asian backgrounds, they're only fighting for like a few roles. So I think now that this movie was so successful, and it opened the doors to all these other movies, they don't need to fight for just one role. Brenda Song can have more opportunities, Jamie Chung can have more opportunities. So it's all the good news for everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
Like going back to your point about like it focusing on like one part of like Asian culture rather than covering everything, I think that's always hard, right? Like how can you appease everyone with a movie? Like I think it's a valid point, right? You want to try to do it as best job as you can, like, representing a culture from a certain country, but it's hard, right? As well, like you said, like there's limited actresses and actresses, right? Like even watching this movie, there's a lot of Asian actors I knew, right? Like the shows and the comedian that plays the
Ken Jeong.
Like he was in it. I was like, I never watched this. I'm like, oh, he's in it. I didn't realize he was in it. Like there's still those familiar faces that I would know from like other Hollywood movies, right? So it's hard to like, because like, would that take away from the movie? Like maybe not casting like maybe really well-known Western Asian stars, and then like maybe focusing on more homegrown stuff. Yeah. But like you said, I think it is what it leads to can be more important, right? That it gives chances for everything else to be maybe a bit more fluid and more accurate with the culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think for this movie, they hired a lot of actors from Singapore, supporting characters like the friends, like the past love interest, like the families, and things like that. I think that's really good because it sort of like showcases the talent that's outside of the West, and I think that's really good. And shout out, I'm Filipino. There's actually like a really famous Filipino actress who played like a princess in the movie. She was in her name is Chris Aquino. She's a famous actress in the Philippines, and she played Princess Intan. So if in that scene in the church, she's Filipino. And I watched this movie in the Philippines. People were like, clapping, like 100%. We're so proud of her.
100%. And I would do the same thing if I come across a Vietnamese actor or actress in a Hollywood movie, and it doesn't need to be a successful one, but it's you know what I mean? Like it just represents a big step. It's just like a first step on the moon.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to get your foot in the door, right? Yeah. That's the thing, and it should lead on to more things, right?
And the interesting about Ken Jeong is like before he joined this movie, he was quite well known for the Hangover trilogy, but in that movie he was playing a side character.
Well, he's even like trying to remember that character from Hangover, but he's very like insane, right?
He's insane,
not, it's not like like he's not like an interesting like Asian character. He's like an insane madman. Which I think he plays well because he's I think he's really funny. But even in this, he is really goofy, right? He still plays on what he's good at. but it's still like an interesting father role from him as well.
Yeah. And are there any favorite scenes about this movie? I know it might be difficult because there are so many good scenes, but if you have to pick one that stays in your mind, what would it be?
I really like the scenes that showed more of the culture of Singapore, specifically the food.
Oh yeah, the night market scene.
Yeah, I like food, so especially Asian food. So when they actually showed close-up shots of like the satay and all the barbecues and all the food and glazing and over the fire and you can see it sizzle, I was like, I actually want a satay right now. Thinking about that.
So do I.
Yeah, and also sort of like all the shots of like the city and of the the ocean and the water and all that stuff. I think this movie's cinematography is really good. I think it just adds to the story, and I think the food's my favorite scene.
No, I don't blame you. Like when I saw that scene, it's like they are filming this scene a really long time. Like they're showing a lot of food.
It's like it's advertising, right? They're doing. They're just like, when we do this film, there's got to be like so many minutes of like showing off the local, the locals, which I think is good, right?
Yeah.
You get a really good or somewhat accurate portrayal of what actually happens there, right? Not just kind of like a bit more glorified for Hollywood or whatever, right?
Yeah, and what about you, team? Do you have a favorite team?
I think we already talked. I really like the mahjong scene because I think it really encapsulates everything that's like going on in the movie with the characters and stuff, and even that tension, because that's the tension through the whole movie, right? With the mother-in-law and her about being not good enough and being from a different culture and they won't accept it. Because I think it was the scene, because I was even running back to when they're actually at the wedding and she like does herself up. She's like, I'm not going to let this bother me, right? And then at the after party, they're like, we've got like this, we've got a detective. We figured out that, you're, from a child of infidelity, you're not. And it's like this whole big step just to kick her out, right? It shouldn't be a big deal, but to them, they're like high society. You're not right for our son. Get out of here. And that really, it's fair that it breaks her because she doesn't know, right? And hearing it from someone else, and it's like, what is this?
Yeah, and I really like that scene as well because it has quite a few different layers of meanings. Because technically, from Eleanor's point of view, she's doing the right thing though. Because
that's how she was treated as well, right?
Yeah,
you have to pass this test.
Yeah, and she wasn't accepted by the grandmother, so she had to prove herself. And basically, she's doing the same thing to Rachel, which is very understandable because we spoke about this before. The difference between a good villain and a bad villain, per se, is how they perceive themselves in the story. Because let's say if you are a villain and you just do evil things because you are evil, then that doesn't make you a good villain.
Well, it's even strong to say villain, right? She's not really like evil. I wouldn't say she's evil. She comes across maybe more mean-spirited more than like she's doing this for like to take over the world, right? She's just doing, it's very human, doing it for her son. She's not doing it for herself, right? She feels like her marrying him would like destroy their image as well, right?
And this is what I mean by a good conflict in a movie, because when you get to that point, you understand both sides of the story. So you are in a conflict yourself. You'll be like, I really understand her point of view. So she's not doing anything crazy. But like, of course, telling someone that you don't deserve her son and, we don't want you in the family is always very
And then like
difficult.
getting a detective to find out like like your father isn't really who you think your father is and stuff. And it's like, especially when you don't know it as well. Could you imagine that? Like how brutal would that be, being into like your mother-in-law's and she's like, I found out, by the way, you're like a son of infidelity. It's like, what are you talking about?
And another layer of meaning that I wanted to bring up is it actually plays in the twist of the rom-com, and like a lot of good movies. A lot of good movies have good twists. We talked about this before, but I think the best twists are all about the human connections. Well, like we don't really care about like the fate of the world or like alien attacking us, but like whenever there's human connections anywhere, we can always relate to it. And I think it's in a way it treats the audience as a bit of a mature audience. We don't treat them like children. Like these complications, these feelings are very complicated, and they shouldn't be dumbed down for the audience.
But I don't think they're shown. They're not like complicated, right? They're very it's very honest with their feelings about what they're showing, right? It's not trying to hide anything. It's not trying to be like subversive or anything. Like it's not anything like that. It's there for you, right?
But that's what I mean. Like now they are showing it in this entirety. Like, oh, this is the conflicts between the mother-in-law and the soon-to-be daughter-in-law, and then this is how far people would go.
Yeah.
Not like, oh, I just hate you. And
yeah,
then,
that's more. Exactly.
Because it reminds me of another movie with Jennifer Lopez and the mother-in-law as well, right?
Monster-in-law.
Monster-in-law.
Which is exactly.
You know what you're getting into, right? It's giving it away.
But I think that's a really good point, and I don't mean to be like an academic and like talk about all these like theories, but I think what I found to be like a major sort of theme in this movie is sort of like the tension between collectivism and individualism. So Rachel Chu, she's an American. She grew up in New York, and she, she's all about pursuing her dreams and her passions and what she wants for her life. And she has a single mother and all these things. And then she comes to Asia and she's facing collectivism, which she understands from a cultural perspective, but she was never embedded into it. So for example, things like, family togetherness, all the aunties are there talking about her, gossiping about her, all the friends, all of, even the house staff she needs to, be familiar with. So I think that was a major sort of thing that I sort of, even me coming to Australia, sort of, I'm beginning to understand now, because even the culture here is different. So I think for me, it's different. Not that my story is Crazy Rich Asians, but coming to Australia, I have to, adjust to a new culture, to this individualistic society. And I think the same could be said about Rachel coming to Singapore.
Interesting.
And I think, and actually answering to your question earlier, one of my favorite scenes was about, how in Asian culture, people love to gossip. So there's this one scene where Rachel and her boyfriend
Nick were eating together at the restaurant.
Correct. And then within a matter of like less than an hour, I would suppose, this news has spread through the Pacific.
It felt like 5 minutes. Yeah. I feel like it didn't take that long at all.
Yeah. And I wish I can say that's an exaggeration. It's not. It's not. In Asian culture, I don't know about in Vietnamese culture, but in Filipino culture, that's the same. So news spreads fast, people talk, and especially among aunties. So aunties, I don't think they're necessarily people you're related with. I think any one of your mother's friends or your father's friends
can be considered
are
aunties.
all your aunties. So I have 100 aunties back home, and I think it's the same. And even that scenario where they were in a prayer they were in like a Bible study, they were gossiping.
Yeah, they weren't really there for the Bible, right? They're there to gossip.
Maybe half of it. They were there, for salvation, but half of it they were there for the goss, and they got.
Because that's how the mother finds out as well, right? Yeah. She doesn't find out from Nick.
No,
she finds out from the aunties,
from
right?
the aunties, and I think that scene is just so familiar. If you go to any Asian holiday like Christmas or birthday or anything to do with the gathering, I think gossip is the
glue that holds people together.
That's it.
And again, it really adds to the movie because this movie is not afraid to show the dark sides of different cultures, because it's a very human thing. Like we're not perfect. We have dark sides, we have good sides, and something that is so, I guess, badly looked upon in the Asian culture is very interesting to the other cultures, like the gossiping. I'm pretty sure everywhere people gossip.
I think everyone enjoys gossip, but maybe not to that level. And it's hard as well. Like, I don't know how it is for people, like normal people, right? Because these are super rich and he's popular because of that, right? And that's why it's so gossip that it's just two Asian girls that see him, and the restaurant's like, oh, he's with a girl. Let's take a photo, send it to one of my friends, and they send it to someone else, and then everyone rolls on from there, right? Where you know, I don't know how that would be like, say, similar for you, like if you went out with somebody and you're there and there's someone in the culture store, he's like, oh, and then I'll like send it to someone I know who knows them, and then they'll send it to someone else.
Yeah. Maybe it's more heightened for Nick and Rachel because they are sort of, especially for Nick, because his family is so prolific and they're actually quite high profile, and maybe for him, you know, the stakes were higher, and you know, maybe people around them they talk more.
He did seem a bit ignorant to it, right?
Or maybe
like
he's
at the start. Well, he's a bit used to it, but also if he's used to it, you think he would have warned her much earlier than like, what was it, like the day before, it felt like.
Yeah.
There wasn't much. And even when it's only on the plane when she kind of like, yeah, there's maybe like a bit more going on here than just like, you know, meeting an in-law, which can be a tough thing already, but it's just like at the status of where people are already having a go at you.
And that is an interesting point, because I read somewhere that Nick was actually raised by the grandmother. So the mother didn't raise him. So the way that they raised him was like, he needs to be very humble. Like his upbringing has nothing to do with his accolades. He needs to prove himself to be able to attain the wealth that is laid upon him. So I think over the time that he was in America, he got exposed to different cultures, and for him, like, oh, it's just my family money. It's not my money. So when he took Rachel back to Singapore, he was like, yeah, this is just my family's money. It's not my money. But of course, you know, because he was raised like that, he didn't realize the other effects around the wealth, like the attention from the people, you know, things like that. So that's why probably he didn't warn Rachel, because he wasn't aware of it.
Right. Yeah. Even that, like leading into like, that's like saying he was brought up by his grandmother. That was, we learned later that the mother did that to get in the good books, right?
Yeah.
Because she's like, she already doesn't like me. If I let her raise my child, she will like I'll have a better standing with her, right? Which is also like a crazy thing. Like, I don't know how normal that is in like Asian culture, but like it usually wouldn't happen unless like the parents are like, you know, maybe they're a single parent, or even like that, you know, passed away or something, right?
Yeah, I think that theme is pretty common in Asian culture, where there's sort of, because I think, and let me know if this is the same in Vietnamese culture. In Filipino culture, it's actually quite matriarchal, like the family structure. Playing favorites, it's pretty common, especially among a grandmother and her grandchildren. So there will be, you know, I guess benefits to it, financial benefits. Yeah. I think that's part of Asian culture, I would say. Yeah.
And I think it's part of one of the tropes from a lot of the Asian movies as well, you know, especially the period movies, where, you know, you're talking about a certain period in the past. A king or queen, they always try to play this game of power. They have to put their children in the best position to attain that power in the future. It's very familiar. It's very similar to this. Basically, this is not like royal. They are not the royalty.
But it comes across like that, though.
Yeah. But I think now people are a bit used to that. So now they want more of it, because, you know, like in the history of all the empires, like these are always there. You know, like that. I'm pretty sure that's why Game of Thrones was so big, because they kind of
it's the politics, right?
Yeah, the politics, the schemes, you know, the backstabbing, all those things. But another, I guess, but the one of the good things that came out of this movie, besides the financial thing, is it inspired Ken Huy-Quan to come back into acting. So he was well known for playing Short Round with Harrison Ford in The Temple of Doom.
Hey, lady, you call him Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
And but because of the lack of opportunities, he quit acting.
Which is fair. Like,
for like 20 plus years.
And especially that character. It's like very on point, right? And a bit goofy. I do like that movie, and I think he's fun in it. But that's what I mean. It's just like, it's a bit hard for like, if you grow up a bit, it's like, oh, you're that just kid from Indiana Jones, right? It's going to be tough.
Yeah. And, you know, it's not just hard for him to get over the shadow of his talents, but when I think the more that the older that he becomes, the harder for him to get jobs. You know, we were just talking about how competitive it is, because like there are always young actors who want to get into the industry. Yes, but this movie kind of inspired him, and he was like, "Oh, I can't believe that all of my fellow actors and actresses are on the screen in Hollywood."
I was going to say, is that a good segue to our next movie? Maybe.
I was just going to say, but the next movie it doesn't star Ken Huy Quan, but it's another, I would say, romantic. I didn't see any comedy in it, but it was a bit of a romantic comedy, Past Lives, that was released in 2022. I think it has a feel of an indie movie, like a very low budget.
I wouldn't say that. It didn't feel indie to me, because there was a lot of like great shots, and like I think the acting's like amazing, and like so many things in this. It does feel like a big movie, right? I wouldn't say this feels indie to me if I had to like put a tag on it.
And you know why I thought it was a low budget? Because I couldn't find a budget. Like the box office for this movie was $42.5 million. But I couldn't find the budget for the movie.
That's strange.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure it would be something like really low, because
probably like 5 to 10 or something maybe? Or you reckon maybe even lower than that?
Probably around 5 to 10, like similar to Bottle Rocket. And the reason why I say that is because like throughout the movie, all the shots, all the scenes are really based in one or two locations. There are not that many action scenes. There are not that many lavishing.
I was going to say, it's not really built around action, is it? They're not going to like start like a Mortal Kombat scene or something. Right? That's not what the story is, right? I think that's what plays well into it, right?
Yeah.
That it is like a large story, but it is small in that way, where it is based on these two people's lives, right?
Yeah, we're talking about past lives.
Yes.
So this film, it was produced, I believe, by A24, and A24 was sort of this. It used to be sort of this. I don't know. I'm gonna call it like boutique studio, but then it's sort of become this sort of mainstream indie, but still mainstream brand, which has been creating really good films. And I think for that box office for an A24 film, it's actually pretty good. And for I would say, I don't know what the budget was, but I think for how simple the story it was, and to make that much money, I think that was pretty good. The director is Celine Song. She's a writer and director, and the film stars Greta Lee and Teo Yu and John Magaro. I would say it's a love story that wasn't.
Yeah,
I think that might be like a good description of what this film is. So maybe I can talk about a synopsis, because I love this movie. So
it's hard to tell.
Yeah. So I think this movie is just it shows like, not an anthology, but it shows like
there's 3 stages of life, right?
That's right. Yeah. So it shows the different stages of the life of Nora. So she's this Korean American woman living in New York.
Even before you go on, I will say, I don't think it's like from her point. I think it's the point of their relationship, right? So it's their relationship story, right?
Yeah, Nora and Hae Song.
Yeah.
So it's both of their stories across different stages in their life. So maybe like the first stage was when they were kids, when they were in elementary school, and having this sort of like friendship when they were younger.
They were like a girlfriend and boyfriend at the end of it, but it is like a young love story.
Yeah, sort of like young infatuation, if you like. And then I guess the second part of it was, so what happens is Nora, I think she and her family migrated to Canada, and then sort of Hae Song stayed in Korea, and then eventually he went to join the military. I think there's conscription in Korea, while she went to Canada and studied there. And then eventually when she does, when she went to New York, I think she was in college. They call it college in America. I think she wanted to reconnect with him, and then eventually they connected, and then they started having conversations through Skype, and then they started having this long distance relationship, and then eventually they started doing all of the typical tropes when you're in a long distance relationship, where you sit on hours over talking over Skype, and then you just describe your day to your love to the other person, but then eventually she wanted more. She wanted
from her life, not more the relationship, but just where her life is going compared to like where this relationship is, right?
Yeah. I think she wanted to connect with him like physically, because she.
Well, I don't even think it was that, because she gave up on that. She's literally like, oh, when can we meet? And it was like a year, right?
Yeah.
And then she's like, I want to like study. I want to like become a writer. I want to win these awards.
Yeah.
I can't do this if I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
So she gives up on it to pursue her own dreams, right?
Interesting as well, because during that conversation, I think when she asked the question, she's like, when are you going to come to America to meet me? And I think Hae-sung made a decision. It's like, oh, I don't think I can come to see you after a year because I have that exchange program in China. But this will be referred back at the end of the movie. But this is interesting because we were talking about like the different cultures, right? I think that when Hae-sung was when Nora was in Korea, like she was young, she didn't have this kind of understanding of the different cultures. When she migrated into the US, she kind of got exposed to the individualism, and now she's like, oh, now I need to worry about my life, my future, my job. And then that kind of leads into her relationship, right? So, but I think during that time she wanted, I don't think she wanted more, but she wanted to have a physical connection with Hae-sung. That's why she asked the question. It's like, oh, when are you going to come to meet me?
Because I think she already made up her mind at that point, right?
Yes, and I would say,
do you think it would have made a difference if he's like, hey, I can come this week?
No, I think so. I think if he had said, oh, you know what, I will come and see you next week, then the story would have been very different.
I don't think it's just her life, right? He's worrying about his life as well, right? It isn't just like who's giving up for the relationship, right? But they're just at that point because they're both in their early 20s at this point, right? So it's still like he's studying. It's not like he can just give that up to move somewhere else, right? It is a hard choice.
Yeah, it is.
Well, should we let Miko finish the synopsis? We've kind of jumped straight into it. But it is a good jumping point because I do think that's when it starts to like develop like all the like issues and frustrations moving forward in the film, right?
Yeah. I think it's great that they were sort of building all these this tension throughout the first two parts of the film, but that I think the film really comes to life at like the third act, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, definitely.
When he comes to visit her in New York, and I think that's sort of when they connect really for the first time as adults, and they sort of like spend the next 3 days, traveling around New York, going to all these tourist spots, and then sort of like reconnecting, and I guess her reflecting on what could have been, and he as well. And then I think a great intersection of that would be a relationship with her husband, who's also a writer like herself, and then sort of how this friend of hers from the past, how this sort of like threatens their relationship, and sort of like the husband begins to think, okay, who am I, right? Am I standing in the way of your past love and all these things? And I think I think that's sort of the synopsis for the third act. This sort of this how it all
plays out after what's that, like 20 years, right? But because it's, I don't know, it is such an interesting film. Like if we go to like start talking about scenes like the early on when they figure out she's like immigrating and he's upset. He's like, because they literally just went on a date because the mother was like, oh, I want her to have some like happy memories before when she goes away, right? So he's like, oh, this is going great. We're probably going to live together forever, even at the age of they're 9 or 10 at this point. So it's like, you can't really rate the rest of your life on being that young, but it's still like being hopeful, right? And then they're at the staircase and the footpath, and it's a great message for like where they're heading. This is as they message through the whole movie about past lives, this is the point of their life where this is where it changes. This is a big change for them, that they're not going to be together essentially, right? I feel like that's the message. Because even like talking about another scene early on, the very first scene is a lady talking about them talking in the restaurant, right? And they're trying to guess what the relationship is between them. They're like, oh, they're together. Oh, what about the third guy? Like, oh, is he with them? Like, oh, they're probably co-workers. And she kind of like stares at the camera at the start. So it's like a great that's even like a little synopsis of like where this film's going, because you don't know where it's going either, because it's just like, oh, what's actually happening here? And even her staring, it kind of leaves us like ominous to be like, oh, what is happening? And
this is so this takes me back to the certain points before when you guys were talking. we are not following the story of the individual people. We're following their whole story. So I think the first scene sets up the perspective of the story very well. Like we are an outsider. We are looking in to their story.
Yeah, we are also sitting in that restaurant guessing what's going to happen and how is it going to play out.
That's actually one of my favorite scenes in this film, the opening scene, with exactly what you said. And I'm guilty of that sometimes. I
think everyone does that a little bit, right? When see something a bit odd, it's like, oh, that's strange, like two Asian people, and then it's just like that white guy sitting with them, right?
Yeah. And I always sort of in my head whenever I'm in a restaurant, not that I am eavesdropping, not that I'm like trying to figure out what's happening with people, but there has to be a story there, especially if it's like a sort of like an obscure group of people, especially if it's like an unlikely set of people. You would think, is this like a work thing? What is this? Is this like a family thing? And when that conversation was happening, or maybe they're like siblings, and then he's that. So I also do that in my head. Like I sort of create a narrative of how this meeting came about. But I think that we didn't know until the end of the movie that's actually I would say the climax of the film.
Yeah, definitely.
You're right, because I think that was when Hae Sung sort of admitted that he loved her or something like that. Was it? Because he
in a way, yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't like a straight out admittance, but it was like more the regret that they didn't get the chance for it, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's enough, like the past lives, it's about that regret of like what we could have had being together. Because at this point of his life, he has just, it doesn't say they break up, but they're on like a break with his girlfriend at the time. So for him, it's like, oh, this might be my only chance. If anything was ever going to happen between us, this is the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of squandered a bit when I think he already knew that she was married, but it's just like probably it wasn't going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And I think throughout the short days that they spent together in New York, one of the things I like about this movie are the dialogues. The dialogues are, I would say, very simple, but it conveys a lot of different meanings. During the days that they went on the ferry, and Hae Sung was asking Nora about, so what reward are you planning to win this year?
Yeah, because that's what he did every time they spoke, right? He's just like, what's your goal this time, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a very normal conversation between two old friends, but in that context, it represents his regret, because he's still trying to hold on to that girl from 12 years ago.
So even 20 years ago.
For 20 years ago. Yeah. So I really like the dialogues, and it's very simple, but then it conveys a lot of different meanings. And well, of course, the third act when Hae Sung comes to New York is my favorite part of the movie. But it's not saying that the other parts are not as good. I think it's a good setup.
Because it's the climax, right?
Yeah.
But leaning off what you're saying about the dialogue, I think another thing this movie does great is kind of like leaning on that silence moments, like when they're just kind of, they linger on the scene a little bit. Or even before a conversation starts, it's like starts off in silence, where they're just like either in an awkward moment or no one's saying something. It does show that kind of animosity, or even like even that awkwardness of like, what are we doing here? Like, what is this leading to? Is this for anything? It's like a hard situation for her and him to like figure out what we're getting out of this, right?
As movie viewers, like I think like the movie has a really good combination of the acting, the writing, the filming, and the editing, because like throughout the small segments that they are together, the movie gives us a false hope. We want these people together. They are meant to be together. They were best friends when they were young. They were separated. It's like a very common trope of a lot of rom-com.
Well, like that would usually be the ending, right? They like get together.
Correct.
That's like the happy ending, right?
Yeah. But then, of course, if we want to talk about the third act, before we get to the climax, I like the small conversation that Arthur and Nora had on the bed. And you were talking about that before, because Arthur is a writer, so he knows the romantic comedies so well. He's like, so in this story,
this will be a great story. Like, this is where it's going.
Yeah. But I'm the bad guy. I'm standing.
He's
I'm
like,
standing in the way of true love.
I'm the one getting in the way.
Yeah. I really like that character.
Arthur.
I think he's such a well-written character for such a stereotypical character. He
comes across very like normal, right?
Yeah.
He isn't like, usually it's like there's like conflict with him, but he as a character wasn't a conflict.
Yes.
To like their story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He was very passive in it. He was like, I understand, I get it. Like this doesn't hurt me. Like he might come across jealous, especially in that restaurant scene, right? When they clearly got great chemistry and having a great conversation, and he can't really partake. But he's still like, he sits through it, right? Like I feel like in a normal movie he would like get up, toss like a drink, or like he'd walk off in a rage, but he sits through it, right?
Yeah, and usually that character in movies like this would be sort of villainized. They would add more negative characteristics to this guy. Maybe he's a drunk, or maybe he's this, maybe he's that. But in this,
he's cheating. I feel like that would have been the easy one, right? He's cheating on her,
Yeah.
and then it's like, he's finally in the picture again, so they can like get together.
Yeah. So I think what I like about this script in particular is that they humanized both male characters, and they sort of wrote these parts wherein we're rooting for both male characters, and I think it's sort of that. I think in my head that is what makes Nora's decision sort of harder, but at the same time, like, it's very clear that she loves her husband, and it's more like it's just this feeling of regret and this what could have been whenever she has all these scenes with Hae Sung, which I think talks about this central theme in this movie, and I'm gonna try to say it correctly.
Yeah. I was worried about this as well. So
I think it's called Nguyen. Is that correct? Yeah.
Nguyen, yeah.
I think so, and I think there's really no like correct like English. Even in the film, they said like Nguyen's sort of hard to explain, but I think it roughly translates to fate or providence, specifically about relationships between people, and I think it talks about like fate.
It's those chance meetings. I think that's what they hint on. It's like that 1 in 1,000 chance of like brushing someone's shoulder. I think that's how they try to explain it, right?
Yeah. And sort of like how we as people, we connect with each other in big ways and small ways, and sort of like how we're all like intertwined, and we all like we all like influence each other's lives. And I think that's sort of, maybe that's what the role of Hae Sung was to her life, because he was able to influence her to be hopeful, to pursue her dreams, to take risks and to do all these things. So I think maybe in a way Hae Sung's role was really just to bring her where she was, which is in New York, to be with her husband. I think maybe that is how I read it. Not that Hae Sung was meant to be with Nora, but Hae Sung, being with her in her life when she was young, being with her when she was at college, she sort of like molded her in a way, and then eventually she was meant to be where she was with her husband because of him. So I think that was my reading.
Well, it is their play on each other, right? Because early on he's like her rock. She explains, it's like, oh, you used to be a crybaby, right?
Yeah. But
she was like, oh, I had no one to cry to, so I kind of hardened up and didn't cry anymore, which is kind of like a big thing of like, oh, not even society thing. It's just like having someone there for you that you really like love and connect with, that you can be open with, and like, because it starts off the movie where they're like they got grades back and she came second, so she starts crying because he won, and she's like, I come second all the time to you, or I don't cry. Yeah, and she's just like, oh, not so receptive, but I do think that a bit, but it does show her change over time. Yeah. Because he's trying to reach out to her. Yeah. And the only reason they found, because she's just like playing a game with him. I was like, oh, let's look up all the people I used to go to school with. And then she's like, oh, what was that boy that I like went on a date with? And then she looks it up and she's like, he's like searching for her. And then he even like, he doesn't say it when they first meet, but later at the end of the movie, he's like, oh, I went to military school. And when I was doing military service, I was really thinking about you a lot, which kind of shows like it's hard for a young man to go into like military training and being like, oh, what would life be like right now if I was with my young love essentially. And that's like, because I don't know what long to serve is, like 2 years or something.
2 years, yeah.
2 years.
So it's a lot of time to reflect on your life, right? And think about where it could be at this moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's what leads into that like second arc of the story, because that's where I think that's from, like when they cut from the immigration, the next scene is him in the military, right?
Yeah.
That's what I love about this movie. It's not like we talk about a lot, not talking about it, but showing you.
Yeah.
And it's like you don't pick up on it until like resolves later in the film, which I think it does great.
Yeah.
Like all those little moments, it's like, oh, that's weird to show on screen, but then it makes more sense as the story continues on.
Yeah, and I was just going to talk about like one of the things that we discussed before. One of the worst things that you can do to a movie viewers is like when you treat them like children. And I think this movie, it has a lot of mature themes, but it doesn't treat you as like an idiot, really, because it shows you a lot of things. It doesn't really explain it to you, and then you have to kind of figure it out, just like the characters. And what I wanted to say before is the underlining theme of Nguyen. It was only mentioned twice in the movie. Yeah. The first time was when Nora met her husband at the residence for writers, and she was just saying like, oh, the concept is basically when you meet someone in the present, it means that you guys have already had some sort of connection in the past. Maybe you brush on each other's shirt, maybe you are just like two leaves on the tree falling next to each other, etc. And then the second time they mentioned it, was at the end of the movie.
Even like the first time she mentioned it, and it's referring to him, right? It's not referring to like the overall story that we're following. It's their story that she's referring to.
Yeah, to Arthur. To Arthur, and he was, and maybe she was like, oh, just the way that Korean used to say to flirt with each other, and he was like, oh, are you flirting with me? But yeah, when I came across that scene, I was like, oh, this is just a normal conversation. But when it brought back the second time, I was like, oh, now this is the theme of the story. And I really enjoy this theme. I think in a way, subconsciously, we are always want something more out of the movies. I guess when we go to see a romantic comedy, like maybe like Crazy Stupid Love or Sleepless in Seattle, at the end, we always see the two main characters together. But with this movie, the end was a bit different. And I think now the audience is ready for something a bit more mature. They don't want to be like, oh, it's a love story. I know the two main characters will be together at the end. Oh, this is different.
I think it's not more about challenging the audience, but more that like it does feel more real. Like this feels like a real story, right? Like that's what I mean. Like the Hollywood version is the happy ending, right? It isn't about dealing with the conflict and then getting over it and then having the happy ending, where there isn't really a happy ending here for their relationship. Because that's like the saddest scene in that whole movie, when he's like getting into the Uber and they're like like getting into it.
Yeah.
And she kind of like she cries. And I think that's a good metaphor for her crying at the end with her husband. She's like, she does feel vulnerable with him, and that it is the right choice for her. This isn't like, oh, we feel sad for this. This is kind of like what it was leading to. This was the conclusion of their relationship, right?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that scene, Miko? Like the waiting of the Uber. I love that scene.
I think that just shows, what's good about this movie is it just you don't need to have so much dialogue to sort of like evoke emotion. There were many scenes where they were just looking at each other. Yeah,
and I love that stuff.
Yeah, with her eyes, there's so many emotions there. Regret, guilt, love, so much. But yeah, I think that speaks of how great these actors are in this film. But I think that last part when she walks back, to her stoop in the townhouse, and her husband's there waiting for her, and then she just breaks down, and I also broke down when I watched that.
It's a very sad moment.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this film is this formula of like a Korean drama. It's not new, right? Especially in the past few years, it's actually been becoming more mainstream. Like Korean dramas are very popular in Asia. I think what this movie does is it brings that, but then it presents it in the A4 cool indie delivery, where because I'll be honest, some Korean dramas are a bit too sappy for me. They're a bit too sentimental. There's too much crying. There's too much emotional music. I think what this movie does well is that it tells that story, but then in a more realistic, authentic way. Like it shows the real moments. It shows like the quiet moments. It shows the, you know, them being at home brushing their teeth, talking about real things, you know, the things that are normal, mundane, but are real. I think that's what I like about this movie, which I think hopefully more Korean dramas can adapt into. You know, there's gonna be less violins and less crying and all these things.
And just movies in general, right? Like I think it's a lot to take from this film, because it's like you said, like even Hollywood romances are completely sappy and like built up to these grand points, but it's usually not grand.
No,
right? It's all dealing like with the heartache and the frustration, and like, and there's always that pinnacle. Like, you know, I don't know how much heartache you guys have had in your life, but it's never like that big of a moment, like you're crying in the rain. It's usually like a quiet moment to yourself, or even in this movie with her partner of like, this is it. Like, this is our relationship done. Like someone that I cared for, that was like, we can't really talk anymore. It's like, it's done, it's finished. We're at this point where it's like, we don't really need to, because he was looking for something else and she was looking for a friend, and they're both not at this point where they needed to be. And I think it's like beautiful in a way, because it's just like, it's not like where people's like, oh, I'm hoping for that Hollywood like ending, but I don't think you need that, right?
And it's funny because I think like the majority of people, they always want a happy ending when they watch a movie, but then they always remember the unhappy endings. It's funny. And if we go back to that scene when they started walking from the apartments, the camera tracks them throughout that whole sequence, and they didn't talk to each other.
Well, that's what we've been talking about, right? It's all those moments of silence between them. It's all about the facial expressions, their body language. It says a lot more than the words.
But they did say a few things to each other when the car finally arrived, and he asked her the questions like, oh, so if we are not together, then what were we in our past lives? Or he was saying like, if this is our past life, then what would we be in the future? And she said, no, I don't know. And I think at that point, he kind of understands that this is the end of our relationship. So he said, okay, I will see you then, like in the future. So basically, in this life, we are never going to be together.
Because that's like the whole message of the movie, right? In another life, they might have gotten together, but it isn't this one.
Yeah. And the maturity of the emotions in this scene is really... It's really the thing that makes me love this movie, because in the end, none of them did anything wrong.
No, that's the thing, right?
Yeah,
there's there's no winner or loser, right? It is just like dealing with life.
Yeah. And what is your interpretation of her crying in the end?
It's just losing a relationship, I think. I don't think it's as deep as like, oh shit, I wish we could have been together kind of thing. I think it is just losing someone that you loved and you had it doesn't need to be this whole romantic gesture. It is literally like losing someone important to you and that you know you might never see them. This is it, right? This is the end. It's a very sad ending. It's not like they had a big moment together or anything. It's just all the frustration, all the like awkwardness, all this kind of thing, this build up. It didn't lead to anything. And it's just sad. It's sad to lose something like that, I feel.
I guess that we would hope to see more movies out of Celine Song, because this movie was praised by Christopher Nolan, and he's like, "Oh, this is one of my favorite movies of the year." I was like, well, "Okay."
I will say he also said he liked Alien 3, so you know you can take that with a grain of salt.
And this movie was also praised by Daniel Scheinert. He is one of the writers of the next movie that we are going to discuss.
You did have a segue. There we go. I was waiting for it.
The writers of the massive Oscar-winning movie Everything Everywhere All at Once are Daniels, the Daniels, because both of them are named Daniel.
Well,
the first one is Daniel Scheinert, and the other one is Daniel Kwan, who is the writer of the novel Crazy Rich Asian.
No.
It's the same name, isn't it?
I think Kevin Kwan wrote the Crazy Rich Asians novel. So they share the same surname.
I'm not sure if they are related. But then
you have to check that.
Yes. We would but we were talking about like Kevin Kwan got inspired by Crazy Rich Asian, and he finally got cast for this movie. When I watched this movie for the first time, I was like, there's a lot going on in this movie. A lot. But it's a big movie in a good way. It's got a massive cast, and the casting for this movie had to go through a lot of challenges as well. When Daniel Kwan was doing the casting, the studio was suggesting him like, oh, why don't we try someone a bit more Western? Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And he had to like really fight to protect the ethnicity in this movie. Let's jump into this movie literally.
Literally? Oh no. So did you want to go for it again, Miko, and kind of give us a quick synopsis?
If I can try.
But as best as you can. I know there's a lot of weird stuff going on.
I would say this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed by the Daniels, I think it's just a story of a Chinese American woman living her life. She runs a laundry shop with her husband, and they're getting audited by the tax office in America.
Damn taxes.
Yeah, it's tax time. And then she just happens to be involved in this multiverse, and she has to save the world. I think that's the story.
I think that's a good way to put it. Like without like getting into it, I think that's the best way to put it. Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when the Daniels, they wanted to prepare for this movie, they took a few years, and then Daniel Kwan was saying something about Rick and Morty, and it's like, oh, I watched Rick and Morty, and it's like every single ideas that we have, they are doing it. So he had to stop watching it because like the idea of the multiverse is like everywhere now.
It's everywhere now, but I can understand that, trying not to influence yourself with that, because even with when we started doing this, I've tried not to watch as many like movie reviewers and stuff, because I feel like you don't realize the influence until like you're finished. So I try not to consume it as much anymore, because I'm just like, I want to try to have my own opinion without it being influenced unbeknownst to me. Anyway.
No, that's a good point. And of course, this movie went on to be one of the biggest movies of the year. So it won 7 out of 11 Oscar nominations.
Pretty good hit rate.
And I think it was one of the few movies that won 3 out of the 4 biggest categories for the acting and the best movies and things like that. In terms of the box office, it was only made on a budget of $25 million, even less than Crazy Rich Asian. But it went on to make $143.5 million, 77.2 was domestically. So it's not like a crazy performance in terms of like blockbusters
of money. Yeah, it's not on that level, but the movie it's just like amazing, right? I personally, that's when I remember when I was thinking about this, between this and Past Lives, like what is like a better movie. But I do think they're both amazing in their own merit, right? And they both tell like it's not a similar story, but an amazing story in like completely different ways, right? Where Past Lives, it's like a bit more simple, where this is like extremely complex and like arbitrary at points and like crazy. Like when they get into the multiverse stuff, you're like, what's happening now? Yeah. What is this?
Yeah.
Like it was still, it was interesting, like with all the dynamics before, but then it's like when he's in the elevator and like goes, whoop, and you're like, he's like, gets the umbrella and puts it in front of the camera. He's like, you've got it. She's like, what are you talking about? Like the insanity of it as well. Because that's what I mean. Because like when you think successful, you do think of like blockbuster money, but it's just making an amazing film that isn't just like the usual, right? This doesn't feel normal at all, right? Even like you said with the multiverse stuff, which is very popular in like movies at the moment, that isn't like the main point, right? I feel like that is just the way to push the story forward in this film, which is what I enjoy, right? Where in most films that we usually see multiverse stuff, that's like the point, right? It's like, oh, we see all these cool characters from different dimensions, where this is just kind of telling her story through these other incarnations of her.
I loved Michelle Yeoh in this movie.
She was amazing.
She was incredible, and I think it just goes back to her filmography when she first started. Because I'm not sure if how familiar you are with her work, but I think she used to be like a star in Hong Kong. She used to be like a big like martial arts action star,
which came to play into this a little bit.
Absolutely, I think
well, maybe a lot. There was a lot of action in this. When like I think about it,
there were, and I think that's maybe the directors like tapped into that and looked at her past and sort of incorporated that in the story.
Not to interrupt you, but like, where was she in the casting? Like, was like the story for her, or do you think it just worked out that well for
That's
it?
interesting.
I think they were supposed to cast somebody else.
The story was initially written for Jackie Chan.
Oh wow!
Yeah, but then
I'm kind of glad he didn't get it, to be honest.
well, I don't want to get into
I can
his
see
story
it.
a little bit. Yeah,
I can see it in the film. Like, it does feel like it would have been like a film for him, but I think she did an amazing job. I couldn't imagine anyone else.
I think
in
the
that
timing was good as well because Jackie Chan are currently under fire.
Yeah, I know.
Movie, so.
Oh, I was going to say I know all the drama with him as well.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And also in the beginning, the two writers, they wanted to name the character Michelle as well, but Michelle Yeoh just like, nah, this is her story, it's not my story. Don't put my name on it. And eventually they changed the name to Evelyn, which is actually not a bad idea because this kind of plays into the idea of like everything, everywhere, Evelyn.
Ah, right.
You know what I mean? That was just a silly joke.
I got it. I was just, there we go. I got it. I saved it.
Actually, if you think about it, the story is actually pretty simple. If you remove yourself from all of the multiverse,
that's what I mean. The absurdity, the spectacle is like there, but it kind of makes it more complicated. But I feel like in a good way, right?
Yeah. Because I watched this in a cinema, and
I wish I saw this in the cinema.
Yeah, it was
I didn't.
packed, and again, there were a lot of Asian people there, Asian background there, and like the first like 15 minutes of it, when they were sort of like, you know, world building and showing her with her husband and her daughter and her father and this house, which is not.
I was going to say, is it really a house? They're like in the apartment above the
laundry
shop.
Yeah, this living space above their business. It's actually, I would say that's not an exaggeration. I've been to, you know, houses that are like that, and you know, it's organized chaos, and that's sort of like her life. And then you're beginning to understand, you know, how the dynamics are in the family. They're getting a divorce. You know, she's trying to, you know, wrap around her daughter's changes and her life and her daughter's partner, and then she has to take care of her father. So it's a very Asian story if you think about it. And then all of a sudden, this sci-fi, you know, multiverse, you know, crazy Matrix level spectacle comes in, and then that just sort of like adds to the story. But still, I think it's really about family. It's really about, you know, tension between mother and daughter. It's tension about, you know, her and her husband. And also I think there's a bit of a past lives angle to it as well, because if you I think even her and her husband, their relationship, it sort of like talks about what could have been had they been in the other multiverse. I think there are many scenarios where her life could have taken a different turn if she, one, didn't elope with her husband, if two, she became a martial artist, she became an opera singer, she became an actress, and you know what other scenarios of her lives could have been. And I think that's sort of like reminiscing. Actually, there's maybe a bit of Nguyen here, because there's like regret and there's like all these things. My favorite scene in this movie was when they had this this scene was almost like a Wong Kar-wai type of scene where they were both actors and
in the alley.
And I think her husband had a suit on, and he's like the CEO Wayman. And then she's like an actress. What's her name in this film? I I forgot her name in this film.
Evelyn.
Evelyn. So she's
Evelyn.
and then they were talking about like in a different life, I would just loved like doing laundry and doing taxes with you. So that's sort of like, despite them being successful in this other multiverse, you know, what really matters is just them being together. So that's sort of like,
because it is a great scene, because this is they're both extremely successful, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, this is the Evelyn we know from our kind of point of view, and she's in this actress's body with success, and she's like, would you give this all up to like be together in this kind of like terrible situation? And then like at the end of the scene, he's like, yes, I would have loved to do that, because they both sound success. It's not like they failed, but it's just like, he's like, I still would have done that. Like I still would have found something in that, right?
Yeah.
Which is like because that's like the whole point of the film, of her trying to come to terms with her life, and not, because I do think there's like that cultural aspect for her as well. Like she's not quite accepting of her daughter, you know, she's trying to put everything on her shoulders, not really talk to her husband, who's like, he's trying his best and honestly trying his best, but not willing to like open up to him. So there's a lot going on for her, but through this multiverse setting of experiencing all of her different lives, it really shows her what she has and what she's like, she actually has and needs to like take account for and try to help, because she's at like, it's literally a breaking point in her life. Like literally the tax office, I don't remember the lady, but Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
And she's literally like, you've stuffed up. We're going to come and take everything, because you're just like, you want to use taxes for your karaoke singing, for your baking.
Yeah.
And like, she's like trying to
She's
claim.
a singer.
Yeah, she's like, she's a singer. She's like, sing for us, sing her a song. Show her. No. But she's like, and that's like the point. Like, she's like a master of all, but
A jack of
all trades, but a master of none. That's kind of like the message that she's like.
Yeah.
When her other husband from another universe comes, like, you're terrible at everything. That's why you're good for this. And it's like, oh, that's a little like brutal, but it's like kind of on point that she's like hasn't found success in anything quite yet, but is always trying all these different things. And I think it's like the way it tells that story is like very well done.
Yeah, and another thing that to add to your point is, I think it's so easy for this movie at this size to mess up, because they try to balance so many different things, right?
Especially it becomes so big, right?
It becomes very, very big. But I think like the first act, or like the first and a half, was set up really well, because even when Evelyn was exposed to this idea, she was still like, what is going on? Like, and we went through the whole journey with her. Like, she kind of got used to the idea of verse jumping, getting into the different
doing all the
ideas.
weird shit before they like.
I love that idea as well. It's like, oh, you need to do a random action to activate this verse jumping, and it just got crazier and crazier and crazier. And I was like, oh, now I understand why people are doing weird things in this movie, even though it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, but sure, let's keep doing it.
There was a part of me in the film where, you know how when you watch something, you try to rationalize something. Okay, maybe there's a reason for this, maybe there's a reason for that. You know, maybe at like the 10th time they jump multiverses, I just
gave up.
I stopped trying to rationalize it. I just surrendered.
Me is when they got into the butt stuff.
Same. Like,
it foreshadowed it before when they were with Jamie Lee Curtis, and she's like, "Look at all my awards," and I'm like, "They are literally butt plugs."
Got 3 of them.
But I think that's like, it's like a bit of a metaphor for like her job's a bit shitty, and she's like got the high price of being the best at the shitty job. And it's just like, but then it plays into till later where they're like trying to put it in their butt to like gain the powers or whatever. And I'm like, and it's just like, okay, this is kind of just a bit goofy and a bit of fun. Like, I don't think it's such a big metaphor for something, but I'm sure if you really wanted to delve into it, I'm sure you can find something there. But
I'm sure there's a story behind that.
But I think it's just a bit of goofiness, right?
Yeah, I really like the character, her daughter, Stephanie Shu.
Is Joy's her name?
Joy's her name. I really liked how, you know, in movies there's always sort of like this villain where they're introduced as something else. So at the beginning she's timid, she's quiet, she's shy, she's not very confident, and then all of a sudden she becomes the opposite of that. She becomes this big boss at like a video game, right?
Yeah.
So she I think, from what I understand, the version of Evelyn in the multiverse, she trains her daughter to sort of like really navigate to the multiverse until eventually the daughter becomes better than her, and the daughter becomes sort of like this boss in the multiverse.
It's kind of like the Neo, right?
Yeah.
It's like the Neo of this movie. She's like, she understands it and like masters it essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then, but I think I was always interested by the daughter when the evil daughter sort of meets her in the multiverse. The evil daughter actually doesn't want to murder her, doesn't want to harm her.
Yeah.
No, she's looking for that acceptance still,
Yeah.
and understanding. Because like, I do like the idea where she's like, I understood everything and I put it on a bagel, right?
Yeah.
Because her like conclusion after all of this like knowledge and power is nothing matters. And then Evelyn kind of agrees with her. She's like, oh, true, right? Like with all this stuff going on, does it even matter? Like all of our actions and all the things we do in life, does it really matter? And that's kind of like the pinnacle of the movie when they're in the laundromat and the tax lady comes in and is like, you stuffed up, we're coming in to take anything. At this point, Evelyn's given up. She's like, she goes and picks up like the baseball bat and like smashes the shit out of stuff.
Smash it up.
Because she's given up.
Yeah.
And she's like, I've got nothing to live for.
Yeah.
It all doesn't matter. And with time to go into the big bagel wormhole and end it all.
Yeah.
But in this moment is kind of her clarity where she sees her husband trying to fix things still.
Yeah.
Even though it's all gone to shit, she sees him talking to the tax lady about like, can we like fix this up? Just talking. And she's like, takes her out of the moment of despair. And she's like, what did you do? She's like, I just talked to her. Where this is kind of like what's happened in this whole film. No one's communicated. They've all gone to these extreme lengths to figure out things when they don't communicate with each other. With her daughter, she kind of doesn't listen, kind of just like, no, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
She doesn't really talk to her father. She doesn't talk to her husband. Even the tax lady, she's not like really paying attention. And they're kind of like in this realizing moment of her like, oh shit, maybe I should just like talk to the people I care about and really communicating my struggles and my like frustrations.
Yeah.
And then like that's like the clarifying moment for her, and she steps away from the other Joy, being like,
Yeah.
I'm going to be there for you. I'm willing to be there for you like my husband is now. Even though he asked for the divorce, he sees that he understands that it's in an end, but he still fights for it, which is kind of like a really inspiring thing through this whole film, right? Like that climax, which is amazing for me. I love that. I was like, she had given up, but no, her goofy husband that puts little eyeballs on things to lighten up everyone's
Googly
day.
eyes, yeah.
He had it figured it out, and he didn't have all these ultimate powers, right? He's just like, I just talked.
Yeah, I think a good point to talk about this film is just how historic it was in terms of like the accolades that it got, and I think in terms of like the awards that some of these actors won. So yeah, Michelle Yeoh is the first East Asian actress, or first Asian actress.
First Asian actress.
I could imagine would be the first.
Yeah, and the second woman of color to have won Best Actress at the Oscars, and I think it's such a great moment for her, and I think nobody deserves it more than her because she's been working for a very long time, and it's the second film in this conversation that we spoke about her, and just speaks about.
She was great in that first.
Crazy
Rich
Rich
Asian.
Asian.
Yeah, speaking of her range, she can play like the villain, mother-in-law, and then in this film she plays this woman saving the world in the multiverse. So it just speaks to that, and also I think speaking of, you mentioned Parasite earlier. So Parasite won the Oscar in 2020, I think. I believe.
Yeah.
And I think there was some criticism in that win, wherein none of the actors were nominated for any Oscars,
Which was a bit of a, they did deserve it. Some of them did. Like I think it was a bit more of like maybe that cultural difference. Like it is an American thing. It doesn't take away from the movie, but I'm sure they weren't focused on it, right?
Yeah. So it's sort of like saying we're rewarding this, but we're not rewarding you.
Exactly.
I
think that's the thing.
The criticism, which I think this movie sort of like breaks that conversation.
I think it's because of her as well. Like she has already been in so many films.
Yes.
Based in Hollywood, right? It isn't just like a Korean film.
No.
That's just like broken the mold and gotten in she has the resume, right? It's easy for them to be like, oh, I've seen her in films. Yeah. I feel like that's all it would have been like. I've seen her in a bunch of films.
She was a Bond girl.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, that's it. Let's give it to her. She did do an amazing job. I'm not taking anything away, but that's how I see they would. I imagine a whole bunch of old white men just being like, oh, I've seen her in something. Yeah, exactly.
And also sort of like even like Ke Huy Quan, who also won the Oscar for this film. And
he was amazing as well.
He was equally, I think, speaking of characters, because I think we mentioned earlier Awkwafina was sort of like the side character in Crazy Rich Asians. In a way, Ke Huy Quan was Waymond was also the side character, but instead of being like the comic relief, which he was at some point.
At points, yeah.
He also was sort of like a voice of reason. He just brought this brightness and positivity, and he reminds me of like, you know, the nice uncle. You know, like
he's a contrast for her, right?
Yes.
She's really down and like not trying to work really hard. He's trying to lighten up things, make it a bit more happy and a bit more fun.
Yeah.
In this like tough situation they're in.
And I think even that character that he plays, I think that's sort of common in many films where it's usually, and this is like something very interesting in Hollywood, in film, like the mother, she's always sort of like hardworking and uptight and really works hard and very serious and sort of, you know, I don't know, very closed and very thinking about work and family, while the husband's chill. You know, he's more of like the good cop as opposed to the bad cop. So you can tell like the daughter has a better relations with her dad. So when the daughter brings her girlfriend, like, oh, welcome,
hello, knows her name, says her name, welcomes her in.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the mom's like, oh, I have to have one more plate.
Oh, you should have told me. Like, I haven't got enough food or whatever.
So that's sort of like, even that character is very similar in the X, Y, and Z movie. And just to see that in this film, talking about this culture, it's sort of like, it's so interesting. I mean, I'm not Chinese, but that culture, it's pretty, I would say it's pretty common as well in my culture, where, you know, the uncles are a bit nicer, or a bit friendlier, while the aunties are sort of like gossiping back. The aunties are more serious, and not to say that they're all like that, but it's just good to see that in screen. But I'm really as I didn't really know much about Ke Huy Quan before this film, I actually unfortunately have not seen the Indiana Jones, or even was it like the Goonies where he was also in
as well,
And I think his story has been so interesting because it's just like a redemption arc for him almost, because he's been forgotten, and talks about how difficult it is to not just thrive but survive in this industry.
Yeah, even survive, right? Like that's the thing. Even just to get a job, not even. Like, not that they knew what this movie was going to be, but like something as big as this, right? You probably never thought of this would ever happen again, right? And this has led into other things, right? He's probably never going to worry about work now. I could imagine. Well, I hope for, right?
Hopefully,
he does deserve it.
Another aspect I want to bring up is the actress Stephanie Su. It's like she was the main villain of this movie, but apparently Awkwafina was cast to play this character, but she couldn't play it because of the schedule conflict.
Interesting.
So Stephanie Su came in, and I think she was phenomenal in this movie. So let's talk about the character of Joy / Jobu Tupaki. So in the beginning, I thought the name was just like, it's just a name that sounds cool. But apparently, it sounds very similar to a Hindi word that means pocket gun.
Oh.
Like a gun that you can fit in your pocket. I'm not sure if it actually is, but people were online because they liked this movie so much. They were saying like, oh, it's impossible to create something completely random, even for a name. It must have some sort of meaning. And I think Stephanie Su really showcased her range in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I want to discuss the underlining themes of this movie as well, but let's talk about some of your favorite scenes of Stephanie Su or Jobu Tupaki.
There's a lot of crazy scenes like with her in it, but it's her just playing Joy. Like I think that end scene when she's like running away from her mother when she's had this realization, and she's like, I'm going to be there for you no matter what. Like, I don't care if you run away. She's realized like, I'm going to be there for you now. I'm going to listen to what you're saying. I'm not going to just blow it off and not like accept it. Because even before she ran off, she's like, hey, Dad, by the way, this is my daughter, and this is her girlfriend. She doesn't run around it. She doesn't like try to pass it off, and it upsets her. But she's trying to do the right thing. I think it's powerful, and the daughter's like, why can't you just leave me alone? Like, it's such. Like all the other crazy stuff where she's blowing people off, pretending to be Elvis.
Yeah.
Like that's all kind of cool and fun, but I feel like those more human moments are done really well.
Yeah. I really liked that first scene when the villain of her shows up, and it's like this fight scene, and it shows just like the contrast of her from this shy timid daughter to this villain. It's so fun to see, and you can tell she was having fun in that scene. When she was holding those two dildos, and when she was sort of like talking about. She pretended that she got shot. Don't worry, it's organic. The ketchup's organic. Like that was just so funny, and I think it just shows when characters do a full 180 or an actor does a full 180. It's really fun, and especially with somebody like her, I'm really happy for her. And I've seen her in other movies. She was in another movie called Joyride. So Joyride is sort of like The Hangover, but for Asian American women. So that's like the synopsis right there.
Well,
it's
there you go.
Really fun. And yeah, I think hopefully we get to see more of her. I think we talked about earlier how actresses are fighting for very few slots in the past. Awkwafina was up for this, and had Awkwafina been here, she wouldn't have been discovered. She wouldn't have been nominated for an Oscar. So it's
crazy thing as well. Would this movie be as held in a high regard if Awkwafina did it as well? Because even at this point of this film, she was pretty popular. Like she was pretty big, right? So would have that affected it's always interesting to think about those things, right? That like, would this still be the same film?
Yeah, maybe, but I guess we'll never know. I think
it's for the good at this point. But that's what I mean. Like,
it's hard to imagine anyone else to be.
Well, that's what I mean. Like when a movie works out to be so amazing, it's hard to be like, could you imagine someone else in that role?
Yeah. Actually, speaking of supporting characters, the character of the IRS lady or the tax lady, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, this role actually won.
Yeah, I know. I was
Oscar.
surprised that she won. Not that she didn't do an amazing job, but I was like, I was surprised that she got nominated. I was like,
it was her first Oscar as well.
Yeah, which is crazy as well. Like she is a great actress, and obviously near the end of her kind of career, well, who knows? She could keep going forever, but like it's insane that like. I do think she plays a very pivotal role and an interesting character, but it feels like she's only in it for like 10 minutes when she's not like fighting.
Yeah. I actually Googled this. She's only in the film for 17 minutes, which I think is one of the lowest screen times for any Oscar-winning performance. But I think her win, I think, was deserved.
Yeah, definitely.
I think she was a central character in this film, such that she is the source of, I would say, tension in this family, because she is the IRS. She is the tax office, if you like. So because of her, all of these things has to happen. They had to be audited. They had to, navigate the consequences of that. And then being just a tax officer, then she becomes this, right-hand man of this villain. She also plays sort of like sort of a very complex character in the film, and she also plays a love interest in another multiverse with the sausage hands,
with the hot dog fingers,
creepy
as well.
But I think just speaking of Jamie Lee Curtis, I think she won because I've been reading a blog before, like what does it take to win an Oscar? The role is one thing, but that's maybe like a fourth of it. Other aspects could be your career. So maybe this could be could have been like a career achievement for her, and also like popularity. She's actually quite popular in Hollywood, and
definitely
people like her. And she always plays like a big role, like in film sets, like in Knives Out. She was actually like
the elder sister, right?
And movies. I love that movie as well. It's a fun movie.
And also sort of like her contribution to this genre in general. She's been in so many genre films, all the horror movies, all the Halloween franchises, and she was in True Lies, and she sort of like revitalized this. Well, not revitalized, but she was one of the faces of this genre, along with Sigourney Weaver and all these other women. So I think because she excelled in this film so much, that was so liked by so many people, and she's popular, and she's been working for a long time. Maybe that's why she won.
Which is why Oscars is a bit hard to take seriously sometimes.
Yeah.
Because like whether or not she was the best, you know, could be argued. But like, did she deserve it? Probably. But that's the thing. That's what's hard. Because like, when you bring that up, I think of like Robert Downey Jr. winning it for Oppenheimer.
Oh yeah.
Even when Leonardo DiCaprio wins it for Revenant, he's been in other great films. But it is like, they find the film. It's like, oh, this one, he hasn't. He's been in a lot of great films. Now it's time to give him one kind of thing. Which is a bit hard because this is like, oh, if someone does have a great performance and is kind of overlooked, which is why I usually don't take too much, you know, emphasis on Oscar, like nods and wins. Because you're like, oh, is it just going to be... Because there is that whole idea of like, they made this film to try win an Oscar, right? Or even be in the movie to try win an Oscar. Not just to you know... be in a film to like tell that story, where this, I think this doesn't fall under that at all. This is definitely what the film was trying to do. It just happened to work out so well that everything fell in place and everyone did a great job that it like got all the awards.
And it's funny that you mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis, because she is now in another movie that is not doing so well.
We don't want to talk about Borderlands. I already said it before. It was going to be terrible. But.
So, but it's very hard to guess sometimes when an actor or actress is going to be in a good movie. If we go back to the character of Jobu Tupaki, I think like throughout all of the movie, she, like, even though she's supposed to be the big bad, but at the end she does have one goal, which is going inside the Everything Bagel. And the two writers were talking about the idea of the Everything Bagel. So they were using the bagel as a metaphor for the nihilism idea among the young people, because the idea of nothing really matters, so you shouldn't really try anything. And that it seems like it's becoming more and more popular among young people. Why should I try to achieve anything in life when nothing really matters? And that is the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the humanism of being represented by women. Because like, if nothing really matters in life, then it's up to us to create the meaning and the purpose. When I realized that underlying theme, is like, it's kind of blew my mind. It's like, it's like this movie is bigger than what we give it credit for.
Well, that's why all the multiverse stuff is there, right? It's to tell that kind of their story of their family and explaining their meanings and their feelings, right, through this absurd setting. Because that's definitely what I got at it. That like, that's what I felt when I first watched the movie. I'm like, the bagel's the representation of like them giving up, right? But then it's just like the father. He like brings in the hope and the feeling. That's what brings it all back. So I think it's definitely like pretty much on the nose what you said there.
And that is on top of all the other themes like domestic drama, the marital drama, the family drama, the different generations drama. And it's like, man, this is like a lot of things going on in this movie. So if we talk about the performance of Michelle Yeoh in this movie, people are saying like this movie is a collection of her life's work. It has acting, singing, dancing, martial arts, comedy as well. So one of my favorite scenes is when she I got tricked a little bit when the movie ended, and then it zooms out to be her inside the cinema watching her own movie. And it's like, this is so meta. This is so Deadpool. Like, you're breaking the fourth wall right now,
Yeah, but it's like it adds to the story, right? Because that's what she's doing this whole film, is like watching her life, right? In all these different points of view, but it's like literally watching it.
And during the big fight scene at the end, when she put the goggly eye on her forehead, and then
open her third eye.
That's interesting. But she defeated the goons by giving them good memories,
because that's the end message, right? She's like, I'm going to give these people their happy ending, what they want, because that's what I've figured out. That's helped me. So that's what it is. She's given all these characters kind of their happy ending or what they want, right? That's what I mean. Like they've all these characters have given up in some way or another. So this is like her giving them what they need.
Yeah, and all the spectacles of this movie, my favorite scene is the rock scene.
Yeah, it was great, honestly.
The rock scene like took me by surprise. You know, because like up until that point, like we've been through so many different multiverses, so many different versions, even the piñata, you know. But then when we got to the rock scene, then the whole conversation, like just subtitles. I was like, this is a break for both the audience and the characters to be away from all this craziness. And for some reason, the conversation between two rocks are even more emotionally driven than all the other conversations combined. I was like, this is great. If you want to talk about that scene.
No, that scene just took me out of the film. It was sort of what's happening, all this craziness, and then all of a sudden the rocks, and they're having a conversation, and then they're having a pretty deep conversation as well about, you know, existentialism and who we are and why we're here. And
I think that's the point, right?
Exactly.
To stop.
Exactly.
There's no distractions on screen, right?
Yeah.
It's all there for you to take it in.
Yeah, and I think that speaks about the kind of film that this is, wherein it's a serious movie, but also it doesn't want to take itself very seriously, especially when that raccoon came out.
Raccoonie.
That was great.
I think at that moment I was like, okay, I just need to pick and choose, you know, what this movie is trying to be. So I think in a way, I actually don't know what the genre of this film is, and I think in a way that's actually pretty good. This movie won the Golden Globe for Best Comedy Musical, right? But then I think there were funny moments in the film, especially like said raccoon scene. But then in a way, it's really like an action film. It's really like a family drama. But I think that's what I like about this movie. It doesn't really fall into one genre. You can just make out what it is and like it.
Definitely. I definitely prefer, because that's like when you're always trying to describe a film, you're like, oh, what's the genre, right? But I do prefer when it's just kind of like, it is just a good film. I can't put it under an umbrella, right? It's got so many different things that it's going on and does well. Because that's what I mean. It's like, oh, it does comedy well. It does drama well. You know, it does a bit of romance well. You know, it does a lot of different things. So it's hard to just be like, oh, this is what it is, which I enjoy. It's good.
Do you guys think that this movie deserved the Best Picture award?
I can't remember the other films that came out that year, but
it's very hard to not remember this movie.
Yeah, that's what I mean. This really stands out. But because is it 2000? Was this
2022? Yeah,
3. Because I know it's not that long ago, right? But
because there was a bit of criticism on this movie winning the award for Best Picture, because people were saying like, this movie is trying to wow the audience with all the spectacles and special effects and multiverse.
It's funny because if that's what you thought of the film, you've kind of missed the whole point.
Yeah.
And then you're probably good that you're not at the Oscars, because I feel like that you would have missed the whole point of the film if that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, the other films nominated in that year were Top Gun Maverick.
So that didn't deserve it.
Yeah, Women Talking.
I never saw that, so I can't.
The Banshees of Inisherin, The Triangle of Sadness, The Fablemans. Yeah, All Quiet on the Western Front.
That was amazing.
Yeah. Avatar, Elvis, and Tar.
So it was kind of a weird year, because that was just like almost just out of COVID.
Yeah.
Because that's why I think Maverick got in there. Like, it is what it is. Like, it is, I wouldn't call it a movie of the year thing, but I don't even know how that got there, to be honest. Because that, I think it was just probably the most successful movie of that year, maybe.
Well, after Avatar.
Yeah, so it's just like, oh, let's just put it in there. Where it's just like,
Yeah.
It's like a fun action film, but it's not like compared to like Everything All at Once, like it doesn't compare at all, I feel.
I think that's a really good question. Your question about who's deserving to win an Oscar. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, wherein the Oscars, I think it's a campaign. You know, you have to win votes. You have to win, it's a popularity contest.
That's the thing. I think because that's what people expect it to be more like critical, but it is popularity.
Yeah. So if the question is, did it deserve to win? I would say yes. But I don't know the thinking behind the Academy. Why they?
Well, that's the thing as well. Like that's you don't know exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Like I saw All Quiet on the Western Front. I've watched a bit of Tar. They're both amazing films in their own right. But even that's what I mean. Like this is a more approachable as well. This is easy for someone that's maybe not big into movies. I would recommend this and enjoy it. Where Tar, people would get bored in the first 10 minutes if you're not into movies because of It's like it's a tough story to tell about someone you don't really like. So it's like it's hard to watch it from someone trying to enjoy a film, where I do think it's a great movie, but I don't think people would sit down and be like, oh, I'd love to watch this on a Saturday night, where Everything All at Once, I think you could say anyone would watch that and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Where I think that's a good mix of
it needs to be like a balance between
a good popular film to watch, but also has quite a lot of meaning and substance to it.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And I think we were talking about this before. This movie was like the pinnacle of the Asian influence in the entertainment industry now.
At the moment.
At the moment, at the moment. And I think you mentioned that now on the streaming platforms, more and more content from the Asian culture is kind of flooding the platforms, right?
I would say so, especially in the last, I would say, 5 years. There has been like acceptance worldwide of like, you know, content from everywhere in the world. So, for example, your Korean content, Korean dramas are quite popular. I would say even like if you go on Netflix, if you go on Amazon, there's a lot of like Indian content,
Indian stuff
from Bollywood. But I think what's interesting about, and that's all good, but I think what's interesting about these 3 movies that we talked about is that they were released in the cinemas. And I think we talked about earlier, if a movie is in the cinema, there's something special about it, because going to the cinema in itself is a special occasion. You have to drive to the cinema. You have to pay for parking. If you have kids, you have to pay for a sitter. You have to pay for expensive popcorn. You have to sit in a crowd with people, and you have to have dinner before. So it's a whole ritual, if you like.
It's more an event, right?
An event. It's an experience. So to bring people to sit in a cinema, people usually, you know, prefer like a Marvel film or a popcorn film or like a summer blockbuster. So for
Top Gun,
exactly. So for these films to have been released and enjoyed in a cinema, I think that's great.
Succeeded as well.
Succeed. I think that's the right word, to be accepted and to succeed. Not just in Asia, but around the world, in the Western world. And if you think about the Western world, like what are the biggest like box office areas in the world? So it's America, China, and the rest of the world, right? But I think it's great that these films are being accepted and enjoyed by Western audiences. So that goes to show that, you know, stories, as long as they're good,
that's all that should matter.
That's all that should matter.
It's literally like getting through the front door, right? It's like everyone's out in the yard, and these are the like movies that have welcomed in, and then everyone that's in the yard can like finally come inside, kind of thing, right? Because that's the hardest thing, kind of like getting through and accepted, because Hollywood is such a weird place. And like whether a movie succeeds or not doesn't mean that's what, you know, find success and stuff. But all of these movies we've talked about have found success in one way or another, whether it is like critically or even through the box office. Nothing like, you know, to the levels that we know they can get, but even for like, you know, a $20 million film to make over $1 million and beyond is like amazing. And that's what you want to see. I prefer kind of those films that are like a bit lower on the end, and then like, you know, there's a bit more thought and love behind them, kind of like, not to have shots at more Marvel, but, you know, it is just like an industry. You know, they want these movies to make billions of dollars. They're not there to like for a bit of love and like feeling for these movies, because I feel like that's kind of what they miss. But that's like, you're not going to watch Marvel for that stuff.
And I'm just going to say, like, the success of these movies can be understood in one or two ways. One, now people are realizing that there are quality content anywhere, like everywhere in the world. And number two, maybe the content being produced by Hollywood is going lower in quality as well. Because like I think eventually when you are consuming something to a certain point, you get used to it and you're like, oh, now I want something different, I want something more. And the issue with like with the Marvel movie is it seems like they don't really care about that stuff. They're like, oh, this is our campaign, this is our products, we're just going to churn it out and you're gonna like it. Which is a bit backwards sometimes, I think.
Well, I don't even think it's like forcing someone to like it, but it's just like it's there to make money, right? Where I don't think it's like that's hard. Like I kind of think they both make a point. Like maybe some of the films have kind of fallen off a bit, but also I think the focus, like it's always been on the money, and that's usually what hurts. Like you see some series, like I was talking about Alien before, you see those first two films are like amazing, and then we get to like Aliens 3 and the next
Aliens
one
versus
afterward,
Predator,
and you're like, you can feel that it's like churned into this machine. So it's like you want that feeling, but that's the thing, like does that always lead to success? Being a bit more like down to earth, you know, a bit more real, it mightn't always find that success, but I do think it holds up longer. Like, I think all these Marvel movies might fall off. Like, I think the Avenger movies are probably always going to be like a pinnacle thing for people, but I don't think they hold up quite as well in the long term, where some of these movies, I feel like in 20 years, I'm like, oh, haven't seen like Past Lives in a long time, and I'd happily throw that on and like enjoy it again. Where Avengers, I'm like, I need something to fall asleep. Maybe I'll put Avengers on. But I think it is a complex space now.
That's good.
It's a little bit easier to like get in. Like you can post anywhere, like going on YouTube or finding a streaming service to get your movie put onto, where before it's like, I feel like there's so many gatekeepers to like get into Hollywood. I feel like it's easier to get in, which can be a good and a bad thing, but I always like to, you know, that's what I mean, because it's always easy to look for the big movies and easy to watch them, but sometimes it's harder to look for those movies that are not so easily readily found.
Yeah. So what can we expect for the future?
Well, hopefully more films like this, right?
Yeah, but maybe like even more different in cultures as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you mentioned that Bollywood is like this massive industry, but like I think that it's just only being consumed by just the people in India.
No, but that's what I mean. It's its own kind of market, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not big in, I wouldn't say it's huge in Western culture, but that doesn't matter. Which I think is also a good thing. Like you'd like like I'm sure there's a huge Asian like movement of movies, but nothing I'm assuming like Bollywood.
I would agree with that. I would say maybe tell good stories, and then those stories happen to be of people from other cultures. So I think this is a good jump off point. We're focused on, you know, East Asian culture now. Maybe we can expand a bit more. Maybe Southeast Asian culture, South Asian culture. Like I've been watching. I've been seeing a lot of good like Middle Eastern content, like stories from Lebanon, stories from Algeria. Those are really good, and films from Iran as well. So I think, you know, those stories from that part of the world are interesting. Are you know, they're human stories, and I think we don't need to sort of like box them into this, you know, this genre of they're an international film, they're a subtitled film. They could be adapted in a way that, you know, Western audiences can
consume it as
consume
well,
and
right?
accept and succeed. And also like Latin American film as well. I mean, there's so much stories out there in the world. So I think now that they've seen that this can be profitable and Hollywood follows the money, right? So hopefully this is gonna lead to all good things.
Yeah,
right,
definitely.
Awesome. And I think this is a good cut-off point for this episode. So we have reached the end of the episode. If you guys enjoyed this, click on the like button, click on the subscribe and the bell to get the notification for the next episode. And thank you so much, Miko, for joining us into this
Thanks
episode.
for coming in.
Definitely a big upgrade. Well, you know, guys know we need some talent in this. But until then, this has been Movie Beings.